Good evening. All right. My name is Willard Jenkins, and what a pleasure and a thrill it's been to have been selected to serve as a jazz scholar in residence here at the Library of Congress. What a resource this is. And forgive me because I'm not an actor, so I will be reading. But when I received the news of this honor of being selected as a jazz scholar at the Library of Congress, I eagerly got busy in eagerly got busy investigating the extent of the various Library of Congress jazz collections and the assets through their simple to navigate online resources. It became clear rather quickly through their research guides that many of the resources within these various collections at the Library of Congress were, likely music scores, composition lead sheets, arrangements, transcriptions, assets from what I refer to as the science of music side of these great artists' careers. And when I speak of great artists, just to give you a sense of the jazz collections at the Library of Congress, they include collections from the following: Billy Strayhorn, Anita O'Day, Billy Taylor, Bruce Lundvall, the great record man, Charles Mingus, Charlie Barnett, the photographer William Gottlieb, and an exhibition of some of his wonderful photos greets you as you arrive at the Madison Building's first floor reading room. The collections of Dexter Gordon, Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Bellson, Carmen McRae, Jelly Roll Morton, Jerry Mulligan, Max Roach, Hazel Scott, and Eric Dolphy, to name just a few. Further investigations of the Library of Congress Jazz Collection's online resources led me to the invaluable posted details of the actual contents of each of their individual jazz collections, including a very responsive kind of Ask the Librarian query function, which enables researchers and the purely inquisitive to focus on a single or a set of specific resources in those collections. It quickly became clear that the jazz collections at the Library of Congress contain a wealth of what I'll call technical music materials. Again, we're talking scores, lead sheets, arrangements, and transcriptions, or again, documents which I always refer to as part of the science of music. And that's great for musicians, for composers, or for music students. But where was a non-musician like me to turn for any sort of the collection elements that my appointment required? And particularly the reason I'm standing up here this evening. Where was I to turn for the kind of discoveries, and I use that in quotes, that would not only make sense to me, but also in terms of reporting to this audience? My guess is that this audience, and I look around the room, I see one person I know is a musician. But my guess is that this audience is largely not dominated by musicians, composers, arrangers, music students, or music educators, with one possible exception. I eagerly made my research visit to the first floor reading room at the Madison Building. My first visit was in early March. When I arrived at the reading room, I was met by the person who was slated to be the primary Library of Congress resource for me, my guide on this journey, and that would be Claudia Morales, the young lady in the hot pink jacket in the back. Claudia is a producer of the Library of Congress Concert Division, an invaluable liaison to whom I owe a great debt of gratitude. Thank you, Claudia. After giving me a very detailed orientation, Claudia provided me with a box from the Library of Congress Wayne Shorter collection, as a kind of way of exemplifying the resources here at the Library of Congress. She must have been a mind reader, because my regard for Wayne Shorter's legacy and his music knows no bounds. I eagerly opened the container that she provided me with as an example, and as I was leafing through the contents, I was delighted to discover dozens of Wayne Shorter's lead sheets, arrangements, and the scores of several of his long-form compositions. Incredibly, they were all apparently written in his own hand. As I leafed through those compositions, I found myself humming the various themes of those Wayne Shorter tunes, including many from Wayne Shorter's formative days with Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers, some from Wayne Shorter's Blue Note recordings, and still more from Wayne Shorter's Weather Report days. Having seen the band Weather Report dozens of times in every incarnation of what was arguably the greatest electric jazz band in the history of the music, I was beyond enchanted. I found myself humming all these themes. But I quickly sobered up. What was someone like me to make of these vast resources? Someone largely untrained in the technical aspect of music. How was I to report to you on what beyond tune titles appeared to my untrained eyes more or less as sheets and sheets of pure hieroglyphics? With Claudia gently guiding me, I did a deeper dive into the list of the Library of Congress jazz collections. Having seen the February 21st PBS American Masters Series documentary on pianist and vocalist Hazel Scott, how many of y'all saw that? It's wonderful. Hazel Scott, one of the truly underrated virtuosos of our time, someone who is fluent in both jazz and what we refer to as European classical music, my eyes quickly landed on Hazel Scott's entry in the Library of Congress Jazz Collections list. Spotting Hazel Scott's entry in the Library of Congress Jazz Collections was also quite resonant for me personally, because her son, Adam Clayton Powell III, is a longtime friend of the DC Jazz Festival and someone I interviewed for the Billie Holiday audio documentary series that I wrote titled No Regrets, The Music and Spirit of Billie Holiday. If you want to know more about that, see me afterwards. It's available to stream for free. Adam lovingly refers to Billie Holiday as Aunt Billie, a great friend and mentor to Hazel Scott and someone who babysat for him. As well, Hazel Scott's biographer, Karen Chilton, is a friend and contributor to my 2022 book, Ain't But a Few of Us, which is a series of interviews with black music writers. So I quickly requested some of those Hazel Scott cartons. And as I leafed through the Hazel Scott collection, it became clear that this Library of Congress residency would be a great learning experience, even for a non-musician like myself, but someone who has otherwise been deeply immersed in this music for more than a minute. Myself, my own odyssey in this music, I've gone from a voracious high school and college student record collector to a student newspaper jazz reviewer, to post-grad days first as a green jazz journalist, a student jazz radio broadcaster, a jazz enthusiast organizer, a seat-of-the-pants jazz performances presenter, a university jazz educator, a radio show host, and eventually an arts administration career on behalf of jazz, to my current stations as a writer, a weekly jazz broadcaster, and a jazz festival presenter. The burning question remained, however, how could I make a truly substantive experience out of this opportunity and have something to say to whomever was going to show up this evening for my talk on what I actually discovered during this appointment? Meanwhile, I got busy initially examining the Hazel Scott, Dexter Gordon, and Max Roach collections, among others. I sent some images from those collections to Claudia Morales to show you this evening, and hopefully we'll get these in the right order. But throughout my examination of the Hazel Scott collection, It quickly became clear that this woman was not only an incredible musician, she was also quite the race woman, as we used to refer to people who thought and worked tirelessly on behalf of black people. There's an image here in this collection of her essay, which I presume she typed herself, titled Message to Young Black People. I also found essays by Hazel Scott that she had written about Brother Malcolm, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, among others. From the Max Roach collection, there's 2 flyers advertising performances of his classic Freedom Now, We Insist suite, which has recently been recreated on record by master drummer Terry Lynn Carrington. Included was a flyer advertising a performance for the benefit of the NAACP. Max Roach was indeed a race man of the first order. And let's see if I can. There's one of the poster flyers from the Freedom Now suite that I found in the collection. Let's see. and there is another from a 1962 NAACP benefit performance. Now, if you knew Max Roach, I also found a copy of a great letter that Eldridge Cleaver wrote to Max Roach. Eldridge Cleaver was the co-founder of the Black Panther Party. So Max Roach was someone who's known to be a great race man. And if you knew Max or followed his career, you know that like Duke Ellington and others, he was not keen on the use of the word jazz to describe his music. Also included, I found in his collection, is a copy of a lecture that he gave to Mark Crawford's class at NYU that was titled Jazz is a Four-Letter Word, which is a phrase which years later the contemporary trumpeter Nicholas Payton took on as a theme for one of his records. A musician friend of mine and I had talked with Max Roach at a mutual friend's home in the mid-'80s when Max performed a concert in Cleveland. Max invited us to come by his place in New York next time we were there. So on that next trip, we took him up on that invite, and when we walked into his home on Central Park West, lo and behold, we got a twofer. Not only Max Roach, but the great poet Amiri Baraka was also there. And what was happening was Amiri Baraka was working with Max on his memoirs, which still have not seen the light of day, which is a real bone that I have to pick, and that is that so many of our great jazz artists do not have biographies or autobiographies. I did a project once for the combination of the Old Thelonious Monk Institute and the International Association of Jazz Education, building a website, content on the National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Masters Program. And part of that was writing bios for the website, synthesizing their bios down to usable bios for the website, and also including bibliographies and videographies. And I was appalled at how few of these great masters had books written about them. So it kind of set me off on a path because I began working then with the great NEA jazz master Randy Weston on his memoirs. It's called African Rhythms, and that's how that was one of the things that compelled that particular book. Some of the things I was delighted to see in the Max Roach collection were some Amiri Baraka Max Roach interview transcripts and some unpublished memoir manuscripts. And there was a poem that I found in the Max Roach collection that Baraka had written. And I'm looking around the room and I think I see at least 3 musicians. So folks, you will understand this poem. It's particularly Nasser Abedeh, who's one of our leading drummers he'll appreciate. This is a poem part of a poem that Amiri Baraka wrote for Max Roach. And I'll read one of the stanzas. Papa Joe's successor, Philly Joe's confessor, A.T.'s mentor, Roy Haynes' inventor, Steve McCall's trainer. Ask Buhana, Jimmy Cobb, Elvin, or Kluke, or even Sonny Murray when they ain't in a hurry. Milford is down, and Roy Brooks is one of his cooks. Tony Williams, Jack DeJohnette, Andrew Surreal can tell you, or youngish Ferone Beaver and Blackwell, and my man Dennis Charles. They'll run it down. Ask them next time they're in town. Ask any or all the rhythms. Shadow could tell you, so could Shelley Mann. Rashid knows, Billy Hart, Eddie Crawford from Newark is split, but he and Eddie Gladden could speak on it. And Tume, if he will, Big Black can speak. Let Tito Puente run it down. Him and Max been tight since they were babies in this town. So that's just an example of one of the poems that I found that Baraka had written for Max. And that was actually a poem he wrote about Max. And, that poem was one of the things that was really a delightful discovery. And also some unpublished manuscripts from their efforts to write Max Roach's memoirs. And there's another poem in there that I found very provocative. We won't show it, but it's a poem about a certain judge up the street here that Amiri Baraka wrote. I'll leave that one to your imagination. I found several letters in Max Roach's collection that Maya Angelou had written to Max and to Abby Lincoln in the collection. And it was interesting because the salutation always said, "Dear Abby Max," as though they were inseparable in their artistic quest. Leafing through the Dexter Gordon collection, I came upon his essay that he apparently wrote titled Dexter Gordon on Arriving in New York, January 1949, which was doubtless employed by Dexter's widow, friend and colleague of mine, Maxine Gordon, for her masterful 2016 Dexter Gordon biography titled Sophisticated Giant. Going through the collections of such giants as Hazel Scott, Max Roach, and Dexter Gordon were riveting. But then I started thinking about what a thrill it had been in 2024 to receive the National Endowment for the Arts A.B. Spellman Jazz Masters Fellowship for Advocacy Award last spring. And the more I thought about it, the more I began to focus on the element of jazz advocacy as I visited these various Library of Congress jazz collections. Further examining the list of jazz greats whose collections were bequeathed to the Library of Congress, my eyes fell on the names of jazz greats who had not only been great players and composers, but who had also worked tirelessly as advocates on behalf of the music. Max Roach was a tireless advocate on behalf of black people, and the same held true for Hazel Scott. Another who was a great advocate on behalf of jazz and jazz musicians throughout his career was the late great record man, Bruce Lundvall. Bruce Lundvall, his last station in the record industry was reviving the historic Blue Note Records label. I'd always admired and had a warm relationship with Bruce Lundvall, who also worked with my wife as they developed the unfortunately late national advocacy organization known as the Jazz Alliance. And Bruce was someone my wife Susan, who's sitting over here, my wife Susan spoke of very lovingly, primarily by his great example. In the annals of jazz, many so-called record men, primarily industry executives, their reputations among musicians are not that great, particularly among black musicians. Their reputations are essentially as slave drivers, the veritable Simon Legrees. But Bruce Lundvall was an exception. That was not the case with Bruce Lundvall, who had a sterling reputation among musicians, black, white, and otherwise, as attested to by materials in his Library of Congress collection. As I went through the Bruce Lundvall collection cartons, I came across some warmly conveyed letters from such giants as Quincy Jones and Chick Corea. See if I can find those. Here's a letter to Bruce Lundvall from Chick Corea. And here's another from Quincy Jones. And the warmth in those letters and the various communications between Bruce and those musicians was palpable. But then I spotted a name on the list of Library of Congress collections that truly resonated with me. Someone who had been a tireless jazz advocate from so many directions, a champion for the musicians and the music in myriad ways. He was also someone with whom I and my wife Susan had a warm personal relationship with. Someone who had been incredibly supportive of my own advocacy work and never hesitated to express admiration. Someone I had interacted with during my relatively short time as executive director of the late Jazz Support Organization, the National Jazz Service Organization, for which he had been a founding member. Someone who, like me, but on a much broader scale, had been not only a musician, composer, and bandleader, but who had also worked with jazz advocacy on the radio. He worked his magic on the radio for years, television, in the classroom, and as a jazz presenter. Someone whose concerts I had attended religiously at the Kennedy Center, and someone who had a great feeling for Washington. And that would be the late, great Dr. Billy Taylor. So after a few more research visits to the first floor reading room in the Library of Congress Jefferson building, or the Madison building, pardon me, I chose to concentrate my investigation on the collection of Dr. Billy Taylor, who joined the ancestors in the year 2010 after a truly illustrious career. As the late jazz critic Leonard Feather once said, and I quote, "It is almost indisputable that Dr. Billy Taylor is the world's foremost spokesman for jazz." Personally, I began my work in jazz radio broadcasting in 1972 as a student at Kent State University. Continuing my radio work today here in DC at WPFW 89.3 FM with my weekly shows. Billy Taylor had worked as a jazz DJ and program director at WLIB in New York City. I spent 10 years doing jazz television for the former BET or Bet on Jazz channel. In 1958, Billy became music director of NBC's The Subject of Jazz, and then went on famously as the band leader of the David Frost Show from 1969 to 1972. And later as a correspondent on the CBS Sunday Morning Show with Charles Kuralt. And it was interesting how that had evolved, because Billy was a guest, an interviewee on CBS Sunday Morning. And he so impressed Charles Kuralt and CBS that he was quickly engaged as an on-air correspondent. He wound up conducting more than 250 interviews with musicians, the great majority of which were jazz artists. My own jazz performance presenting efforts began at the Northeast Ohio Jazz Society in Cleveland in the late 1970s. As a diehard advocate, Billy Taylor was a founding board member of the National Jazz Service Organization. I worked as a jazz advocate arts administrator first at the former Great Lakes Arts Alliance in the early 1980s, then at Arts Midwest in Minneapolis until 1989, at which point I relocated here to DC as I was appointed the executive director of the former National Jazz Service Organization, for which Billy Taylor was a founding board member. So the sense of jazz advocacy parallels mine, of course, on a much more modest scale, but the parallels were obvious, not to mention both of our many writings on jazz, which you can illustrate here with this copy of Billy Taylor's newsletter, Soundpost. Billy was ahead of the game as far as putting out his own newsletter. Now every musician who totally understands what's up has a blog, has a website, and is a tireless self-promoter, as musicians need to be, particularly in this music. But Billy was ahead of the curve, had his own newsletter years ago. In the Billy Taylor collection, I also found a lot of detail on his radio career advocating for jazz, including his Jazz Alive series for National Public Radio. Prior to that, Billy Taylor had morphed his jazz piano history book into a radio series on demystifying jazz and its history for the masses. The more I examined Billy Taylor's collection and his papers, the deeper and broader his advocacy efforts became even clearer, purely on behalf of jazz music. Its musicians, its audience, his subsequent influence became even clearer. When you listen now to satellite radio on Sirius XM, which is the closest thing we have to national jazz radio station, their real jazz service, when you listen to their real jazz channel, you'll hear specialty programs from such prominent and master-level jazz artists as bassist Christian McBride and Marcus Miller, drummer Terry Lynn Carrington, and organist Pat Bianchi. Clearly, Billy Taylor paved the way for all of them. In 1995, Billy Taylor launched his Billy Taylor's Jazz at the Kennedy Center series. That series proved to be a powerful jazz advocacy effort as well, as Billy would engage guest artists with his basic format with his basic trio in a format where they played some and talked some in a manner that further served to demystify jazz music for audiences, providing them with insights into how the music is made and why the musicians make certain choices. Examining the Billy Taylor collection at the Library of Congress, I quickly learned that in typical Billy Taylor fashion, this was an extraordinary, Jazz at the Kennedy Center was an extraordinarily well-plotted series. It wasn't some seat-of-the-pants quasi-jam session with friends. I found 2 cue sheets for those shows in his collection. There's one for a show that he did with Jackie McLean, and you'll see everything is detailed. Those are only 2 of the pages, but multi-page cue sheets that he had for those shows. Let's see if I find another one. Yeah, here's another one for a Billy Taylor Jazz at the Kennedy Center show with the great violinist Regina Carter. So Billy had these programs all totally mapped out. That particular series, Jazz at the Kennedy Center, how many of you ever had an opportunity to attend any of those concerts? Well, you know what that was about. You know that Billy it was about demystifying the music. Because for some people, there's a mystical quality to this music and how it's made and how improvisation makes the music and how these musicians write this music and make this music, which seems so complicated to some people. But examining the Billy Taylor collection at the Library of Congress, I quickly learned that in typical Billy Taylor fashion, you know, like I say, this was an extraordinarily well-plotted series. He would play with his trio and invite these guests to come and play with his trio. And during the course of the program, they wouldn't just play a set and then end it and then talk after that. During the course of the programs, they would talk about the choices that they were making, why they made certain choices, talk about their careers, and it really warmed the audiences to the music. And in the Billy Taylor collection, I also found many documents I was able to copy right there in the Library of Congress reading room for my own use in this talk. And I want to give you a sense of what's in the Billy Taylor collection from the Library of Congress standpoint. This kind of information is available online, but I printed some of it out. And here's what they refer to as a scope and content note. And I quote, "The Billy Taylor collection represents a comprehensive resource for the study of jazz history, performance, and pedagogy. Dr. Taylor was more than a renowned jazz pianist and composer. He was also an educator who lectured extensively at colleges and universities nationwide and authored several books on jazz history, theory, and appreciation. The collection, which spans the years 1942 to 2004, documents the depth and breadth of Billy Taylor's multifaceted career as a musician, composer, writer, host, and jazz ambassador. Throughout his career, Billy Taylor worked tirelessly as an advocate for jazz and to produce programs that promoted jazz as America's classical music, which was a real theme for him. And you know, that just to give you a sense of the kinds of things there. Here, for example, here's another example. Going back to Max Roach, this is the letter that Eldridge Cleaver wrote to Max Roach. So all these kinds of great artifacts are in these collections. And, you know, like I said, I found many it was interesting because in the reading room, when I would visit, and I generally went there on Fridays, when I would visit the reading room, there would be maybe half a dozen other researchers in the room reading music materials. And among their resources for researchers there, they have 2 scanners and a copying machine. Well, I'm old school. I was looking for papers. I wasn't looking at scores and manuscripts and compositions. So I'm heading straight for the copying machine. They must have thought I was crazy. Every 5 minutes, I was going to the copying machine, just making loads of copies of these documents. Meanwhile, those who were there to investigate the various scores and lead sheets and compositions, they were using the scanners. And they would also, I'd also noticed them out of the corner of my eye, I'd see them taking photographs of the scores and whatnot. But my pursuit was a little bit different. So I used the copying machine. You know, like I said, I'm old school, and my interests were in the papers and particularly the advocacy side of these musicians' career and their efforts. So I furiously engaged the complimentary Xerox machine for my copies. I found the reading room personnel there to be very friendly and cooperative. And here I have to say a special thanks particularly to the reference librarian Morgan Davis, who was quite helpful and collegial. The way it would work is I would communicate my visit interests during the week to Claudia and later to Morgan. And without fail, the materials I requested from the various collections would be there on my arrival, because not all of the collections are housed here in DC. Some are at remote locations. But they would have the materials that I requested there. And the rules are the rules. And you can only have 3 boxes at a time, which they cheerfully wheel to your table on a cart. You're provided with a bookmark, so you can be sure to return a given numbered folder to its order in that same container. It is politely requested that you only remove and examine 1 folder at a time on the table from the boxes you're checking, and only pencils. You can only use pencils to take your notes. And they cheerfully provide the pencils. Such care and safe handling is essential for such priceless archives, and I came to really appreciate the Library of Congress protocol. And that was my journey through the Library of Congress and the jazz collections. And I have to say, it has been an amazing experience and a revealing experience, particularly from someone who's been following the music as long as I have and have been studying the music as long as I have. And you see these slips here? You provide the librarians with these slips, and they pull the collections that you want. And it's 1 box to each slip. So you see I got a bunch of slips. But you know, it's found so many interesting things in these various collections. You know, I talked about the letters, the various letters that I found to the great artists in those collections. And there's a wonderful letter from Benny Golson. How many of you know who Benny Golson is? From Benny Golson to Bruce Lundvall, if I can find it. And here is another of those cue sheets. This one I found particularly interesting because it was for Billy Taylor Jazz at the Kennedy Center program with special guest Davy Yarborough. And those of you who know Davy Yarborough know that he retired from running the jazz program at Duke Ellington School, but he's a tireless advocate on behalf of jazz and has done a lot around this community. And he was a guest on Billy Taylor's Jazz at the Kennedy Center. And as a participant, he didn't even know that these cue sheets existed. So I told him, I said, Davey, I got a cue sheet from your show with Billy Taylor. And he was thrilled because, fortunately, he and his daughter are working on his book. So, you know, you saw a couple of letters to Bruce Lundvall. Those of you who know Benny Golson, has anyone here ever received an email or a letter from Benny Golson? I have, and they're so memorable that I actually printed them out and have a file with several letters from Benny Golson. But just to give you an example of Benny Golson's prose, here's what he said to Bruce Lundvall. He says, Bruce, you are too kind. The descriptive word pictures you painted in your missive about me were absolutely overwhelming. What got me the most was that you referred to me as your friend. You've unwittingly added stature to my image, an image that you're insisting, in italics, will last past our time. You've defied the corrosive effects of time with your heartfelt rhetoric, for which I'm extremely appreciative. You've touched the deepest grotto of my heart as you wrote those words with your own caring heart. Bruce, without a further prolixity of words, suffice to say, you bring a breath of fresh air to an asphyxiating world as you keep pace with a brilliant majesty that's not to be deterred or abandoned. We lovingly call it jazz. Love you, Benny. That's just a classic example of a letter from Benny Golson. But those are the kinds of things that I found at the Library of Congress, and it was really a revelation to be there among those collections and to read letters to and from these great artists, often in their own hand, and to get a true sense of the breadth of the collections that are here at the Library of Congress. So that was my experience.
At this moment, we're going to take some time to answer questions. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand.
Yes, ma'am.
One second, let me walk the mic to this person first. Go ahead.
Okay.
This lady was asking a question.
Yeah, she was first.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, we'll give it to her. Okay, maybe we can get a couple and then you can answer them all. I'm curious whether there's any oral histories in the collection, either tapes or transcribed, since you were talking about the lack of memoirs and biographies. I'm wondering if that exists as a resource.
What I found in the collections that would be close to oral histories were elements like the interviews that Amiri Baraka did with Max Roach for the book. That was an oral history in and of itself. But as far as jazz oral histories, the Smithsonian has specialized in that aspect. But there are interviews in many of those collections because fortunately, so many of those great artists saved elements of their career and stored them. And so now we have the benefit of reading those various materials and further illustrating the depth and breadth of their various careers.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Yeah, sure.
I'd like to know if your life is going to change now with this experience. And the second one is, did you notice any gap that you found surprising in the collection?
First off, my life has changed for the better due to this experience because it's broadened my knowledge and my sense of the various artists that I was able to go to some in-depth examination of their materials. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to go through all of them. There are other elements of those collections that I'd like to further investigate. But, you know, I did get a broader sense of those artists, and so I'm enriched by that. Book? No, what? There will be a detailed blog post on the Library of Congress website.
So any gap that was
Tell me what you mean by gap.
like somebody missing, some part of jazz history that's not captured?
You mean some person missing, or well, you know, these collections, and perhaps Claudia or Michelle can talk about how these collections come to be here. But these collections are bequeathed or donated to the Library of Congress, and so you know whatever's there is there. When you say gap, tell me more what you mean.
Well, the Library of Congress has to do some advocacy too to get collections, right? To collect.
Yes.
And there I'll leave it
Yes,
to-
we do. We go out and solicit collections, but a lot of times the collections are given to us because of the care that we give to the collection. So a lot of the times when we have these performances, we pull out items from our collections to show the artist in hopes that that artist will then decide to give their collection to the Library of Congress. So it's a matter of individuals wanting to leave us their materials because of the way that we take care of them.
Well, have you considered with some of the lead sheets that you saw, comparing the lead sheets to some of the recordings? For instance, I had the pleasure of meeting, who do we just speak of? Are You Real? Benny Golson, yes, here. And knew of the song Are You Real from the Art Blakey recording. But to see the original manuscript, he wanted the song to be played slow, but it's anything but that on that recording. So just comparing the lead sheet to the actual recording, that could be nice.
You know, I think I told you at the top that lead sheets, scores, arrangement, composition are hieroglyphics to me. Okay, so I don't know that I could make an educated comparison between a lead sheet and an actual recording.
I appreciate that, but you're such a man with great resources. I think you could find someone who can help you do that. For the interpretation of that.
Oh, I could certainly find someone who would help me do that. Nasser, you ready to do that?
Well, I do have a question, if I'm in line to do so. Thank you very much. Willard, that was a very wonderful presentation and very encouraging. I, too, had the opportunity to visit the library. And on occasion, the occasion I did visit the library was to look at Wayne Shorter's music. So when you brought his name up, it just opened my heart. You know, Wayne was one of my favorite composers.
Mine too.
I know.
Yeah.
And I still look at the music that I was able to copy. I didn't copy all of it, but one of the things that I noticed about Wayne's presentations, that he just put the music out there. And one of the things that he said about his music is that he wanted just to hear other people just play his music, and to take command of how they wanted to present it. Because there were so many different ways that his music or others' music could be played. And my favorite composition of his was Mascalero, because it was so simple but yet complex. And Wayne's music was like that. And it made me want to do what you did, to just spend time in the library with the music.
So here you have some testimony from a musician as far as the resources at the Library of Congress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Willard, my question is this: in today's world where there's less paper and printing going on, does the library, did you run across any email records or things of that nature? You know what I mean?
I ran across copies, only a handful of copies of certain email communications that musicians had, but no, nothing extensive. I guess that's to come on the collections that will be coming in the ensuing years from various great musicians.
So probably people will print the emails, or, I mean, I don't know, the library people, what's the best way for that to happen? I might want to do mine. Oh, yeah.
We'll take the printed emails.
Right.
We'll take the notes that the composer happened to write on the manuscript. We'll take a napkin that they wrote on it in the hotel room or something. So we will take everything in category and categorize it. So give it to us and we'll move it around.
And to complement Michelle's comment, it depends on how we find the collection. And when we acquire a collection or a collection is donated to us, it's a set of documents. It's already in a set that includes various documents, music, manuscripts, notations, letters, in this case, emails. So we go out there and we investigate, we evaluate the collection as a set of documents, and that's how the collection comes to us. Before we conclude, I want to invite everybody here to do research at the Library of Congress. Willard had the opportunity to be the jazz scholar for 24-25, but those documents are available for everyone. Everyone with a library card is able to come to the music division, to the reading room, make an appointment, and request those boxes. As Willard indicated, some documents are not in-house, so we need to request them off-site. It takes about 24 hours or 48 hours for them to arrive at the library, but we are available for anyone. Anyone 16 and over can have a reading card and come to any reading room and request materials. Those materials don't leave the library, they stay in the room, but those are available for everyone. So without further ado, I want to please give Willard a big round of applause.
And thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.